I remember the exact moment my life shattered into a million pieces. It wasn't a sudden explosion, no dramatic fight, or a tearful confession. It was just a Tuesday, a perfectly ordinary Tuesday, when he simply vanished. 12 years. 12 years of building a life, a home, a future with Michael, only for it to evaporate into thin air with a half-empty coffee cup on the counter and a note that read, "I can't do this anymore. Don't look for me." That note, those words, became the blueprint of my heartbreak, etching themselves into every quiet corner of our once vibrant house. We'd been inseparable since college, navigating career ups and downs, the mundane joys of grocery shopping, and the grand plans of children we'd always talked about. Our life together wasn't a fairy tale, but it was ours, built on a foundation of shared laughter, quiet understanding, and an unspoken promise of forever. Or so I thought. His leaving wasn't just a betrayal of me, it felt like a betrayal of the very concept of us, of the unwavering belief I had in the life we were meticulously crafting, brick by emotional brick. One day I was planning our anniversary dinner, the next I was staring at his empty closet, wondering if any of it had ever been real. The immediate aftermath was a blur of disbelief and an almost suffocating silence. The house, once filled with the comfortable rhythm of two lives, now echoed with my own frantic thoughts. Every object, every shared space, became a cruel reminder of what was suddenly gone. There were days I couldn't get out of bed, simply staring at the ceiling, wondering how someone could just erase themselves from your life as if they were never there. The grief was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I cried until there were no more tears, until my eyes burned, and my head throbbed. But grief wasn't my only companion. There was a gnawing panic about the future. Michael had handled most of our finances, and suddenly I was faced with bills, mortgages, and an income that was now cut in half. The fear of losing everything, the house, my stability, the last tangible links to our shared past, was a powerful motivator. I couldn't afford to crumble completely. Slowly, painfully, I started picking up the pieces. It began with small, desperate acts, calling utility companies, figuring out bank accounts, learning how to manage the budget alone. I took on extra shifts, started looking for freelance work, anything to bridge the gaping financial hole he'd left. There were moments of profound loneliness, sitting down to dinner alone, or waking up in the middle of the night to an empty side of the bed. But with each small victory, a bill paid, a new client secured, a tiny seed of resilience began to sprout. I was bruised, I was broken, but I wasn't entirely shattered. I was learning, painfully, how to breathe again in this new, solitary world. Years blurred into a new normal. The raw wound of his departure slowly, almost imperceptibly, began to scab over, then to fade into a scar. It was still there, a constant reminder of the trauma, but it no longer throbbed with every beat of my heart. I focused on rebuilding, meticulously piecing together a life that was entirely my own, free from the shadow of his absence. My career flourished, I found new hobbies, rediscovered old passions, and cultivated a circle of friends who genuinely cared. I even dared to date again, tentatively navigating the unfamiliar landscape of single life, though a part of me always remained guarded, wary of investing too much, too soon. There were moments, though, when the past would resurface, unbidden. A certain song on the radio, a familiar scent, or even just seeing a couple walk hand in hand could trigger a flash of memory, a phantom ache. I'd sometimes wonder what had become of Michael. Had he found the happiness he seemingly abandoned me to pursue? Was he living a life free from the responsibilities he'd fled? Curiosity, mingled with a faint bitterness, lingered. I never actively sought him out, believing that some doors, once slammed shut, should remain that way. Yet, the question of why he left, so abruptly and without explanation, was a silent companion, a puzzle piece forever missing from the complete picture of my life. I'd built walls around that particular emptiness, convincing myself it was better not to know, better to just move forward. But deep down, the absence of answers always left a faint, nagging echo. Life has a strange way of bringing things full circle, often when you least expect it. I remember the day vividly. It was a crisp autumn afternoon, a few years after I'd finally settled into my new apartment, a place that truly felt like mine. I was leaving a small, independent coffee shop I'd grown to love, tucked away on a quiet side street downtown. My hands were full with a steaming latte and a new book I was excited to start. I was humming a soft tune, lost in my own comfortable world, when my eyes drifted towards a figure slumped on a bench just outside. He was looking down, his shoulders hunched, a cheap, tattered coat pulled tight around him despite the mild weather. Something in the slump of his posture, the way his dark hair fell across his face, felt vaguely familiar. My mind, almost instinctively, tried to dismiss it. No way. It couldn't be. But as I drew closer, a cold dread began to creep up my spine. He lifted his head slightly, and that was it. My breath hitched. The world seemed to tilt on its axis for a moment. It was Michael. Not the Michael I had married, not the confident, vibrant man who had left me. This Michael was a shadow, a mere ghost of the person I once knew. His face was gaunt, etched with lines I'd never seen, his eyes sunken and tired. There was a desperate, almost pleading quality to his gaze, a vulnerability that was utterly foreign to the man who had abandoned me without a word. He looked utterly defeated, like someone who had been adrift for a very long time. He didn't see me at first. He was staring blankly at the pavement, occasionally running a hand through his unkempt hair. I froze, caught between the urge to turn and run in the opposite direction and an inexplicable pull to simply observe this broken version of my past. My latte grew cold in my hand, the new book forgotten. All I could focus on was him, the stark contrast between the vibrant memories I held and the desolate reality before my eyes. It was a bizarre, almost surreal moment, like watching a scene unfold in a dream. The bustling city around us seemed to fade, and for a long moment, there was just Michael, reduced to a silhouette of his former self, and me, an unwilling witness to his quiet despair. It felt like an ancient wound had suddenly, painfully, reopened. My shock must have been palpable because, eventually, he raised his eyes, and they met mine. There was no flicker of recognition at first, just a blank stare, as if he were looking through me. Then, a slow dawning, a widening of his eyes, and a flush crept up his gaunt cheeks. It was clear he knew exactly who I was, and the realization seemed to hit him like a physical blow. He flinched, almost imperceptibly, and then a profound look of shame washed over his face. He quickly looked away, down at his worn shoes, as if the pavement held more answers than I possibly could. The silence that followed was agonizing, stretched taut with years of unspoken words, forgotten promises, and the ghost of a life we once shared. I stood there, rooted to the spot, a bizarre mix of anger, morbid curiosity, and a strange, unexpected flicker of pity swirling within me. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, to ask where he'd been, what he'd done, why he'd chosen to vanish. But no words came out. My throat felt constricted, and my mind raced, trying to reconcile the successful, ambitious man I'd married with this defeated stranger shivering on a public bench. Finally, he spoke, his voice raspy, barely above a whisper. It was an apology, not for leaving, not for the heartbreak, but for his current appearance, for being seen like this. It was a pathetic attempt at dignity, quickly crumbling as he finally lifted his gaze to mine again, his eyes now brimming with a desperate, raw plea. He started to talk, a torrent of rushed, disjointed sentences about bad investments, a failed business, unforeseen medical bills, and a string of unfortunate events that had led him to this point. His words tumbled out, each one painting a picture of escalating misfortune, of bridges burned and opportunities lost. He spoke of losing his apartment, his job, everything, until he had nowhere else to turn. And then, he said it. The words hung in the cold air between us, a cruel irony. He needed money. He needed my money. The man who had walked out on our shared life, leaving me to pick up the shattered pieces, was now sitting before me, begging for help. He described a specific amount, a sum that, while significant, wouldn't cripple me, but certainly wasn't insignificant. He promised to pay it back, of course, a desperate, hollow promise that rang with the echoes of every other empty vow he'd ever made. The audacity was breathtaking, yet his desperation was undeniably real. He wasn't just asking for money, he was implicitly asking for absolution, for a lifeline from the very person he had pushed into the abyss. The humiliation in his eyes was stark, but it was overshadowed by a survival instinct that seemed to trump all else. He was a drowning man, and I was the only ship he saw in his stormy sea. His plea hung in the air, a heavy, suffocating cloud that pressed down on me. My mind became a battleground. On one side stood the raw, visceral pain of 12 years ago, the feeling of abandonment, the terrifying instability, the lonely nights spent questioning my worth. Every tear I'd cried, every struggle I'd endured to rebuild my life, flashed before my eyes. This was the man who had inflicted all that, and now he had the audacity to come crawling back, expecting me to be his savior. The anger, sharp and cold, urged me to turn away, to tell him to reap what he'd sown, to finally experience the kind of desolation he'd left me in. A part of me wanted to see him suffer, just a fraction of what I had. But then, another voice, quieter but persistent, whispered of something else. Despite everything, this was a human being in distress. His eyes, sunken and desperate, haunted me. There was a genuine, undeniable brokenness in his demeanor that was hard to ignore. Could I truly watch someone, even him, in such a state? Had I become so hardened by my own pain that I was incapable of compassion? My mother's voice, from years ago, echoed in my head. Always try to find empathy, even for those who hurt you. It wasn't about him, I reasoned, it was about me. Who did I want to be in this moment? The woman consumed by bitterness, or the one who, despite everything, could still extend a hand, even if just to reaffirm her own strength and capacity for grace? The thought of walking away and later regretting the decision, wondering if I had missed an opportunity for some kind of peace, gnawed at me. The irony of the situation was sickening, but the human element of his suffering was undeniable, pulling me in two agonizing directions. The moment stretched, thick with unspoken history. His hopeful, yet utterly pathetic, gaze was fixed on me, waiting. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to walk away, to reclaim the power he had so carelessly discarded years ago. The satisfaction of watching him squirm, of seeing him finally face the consequences of his actions, was a tempting thought. I had earned that moment, hadn't I? After all the tears, the struggle, the sheer effort it took to rebuild my life from the ashes he'd left behind, surely I was entitled to some measure of vindication. But as I looked at him, truly looked at the broken man shivering on that bench, the anger, surprisingly, began to recede. What would it achieve? More pain, more bitterness. It wouldn't erase the past, and it certainly wouldn't make me feel whole. Instead, a profound weariness settled over me. I was tired of carrying the weight of his betrayal. I was tired of letting him, even inadvertently, dictate my emotions. This wasn't about him anymore, it was about me. It was about choosing peace over prolonged suffering, even if that peace felt counterintuitive in that moment. I took a deep breath, the cold air sharp in my lungs. "I'll help you," I heard myself say, the words feeling foreign, yet resolute. His head snapped up, a flicker of disbelief, then overwhelming relief, washing over his face. He stammered thanks, a rushed, almost incoherent string of gratitude, his eyes welling up. It was a raw, unvarnished display of emotion I hadn't seen from him in over a decade. He offered to send me his bank details, desperate to formalize the transaction before I could change my mind. I told him I'd transfer the money later that day, on my own terms. There was no warmth in my voice, no forgiveness, just a calm, detached finality. I wasn't doing it for him, I was doing it for me, to sever the last, lingering thread of animosity. He looked as if he wanted to say more, perhaps apologize for the past, or explain himself further. But I cut him off, not unkindly, but firmly. "Don't contact me again," I stated, my voice steady. "This is it." My words, though simple, carried the weight of years of silent pain and a definitive closing of a chapter. He nodded slowly, understanding. The relief was still there, but now mingled with a renewed shame. He knew this wasn't a reconciliation, it was an ultimatum, a final act of charity from someone he had deeply wronged. As I turned to walk away, I didn't look back. The air around me felt lighter, almost as if a heavy burden had been lifted. The transaction wasn't just about money, it was about finally, definitively, letting go. Walking away from that bench, leaving Michael to his fate, felt strangely cathartic. There was no triumphant feeling, no surge of revenge, just a profound sense of release. The raw anger and the gnawing resentment that had subtly colored parts of my life for over a decade simply evaporated. It was as if by acknowledging his brokenness, and by making a conscious choice to extend a gesture of, not forgiveness, but perhaps a detached mercy, I had finally severed the last invisible chain that bound me to his past actions. The rest of that day, and the days that followed, were filled with an unusual quietness in my mind. The constant, subconscious why that had always lingered in the background finally faded. It no longer mattered why he left, or what had become of him. His appearance had served a purpose. It showed me how far I had come, how strong I had become, and how little power he truly held over me now. I had faced my past, not on his terms, but on my own, and emerged intact, stronger than before. This unexpected reunion wasn't about healing a relationship, it was about healing myself. It was about finally putting to rest the ghost of a painful past, about closing a book that had been left stubbornly open for too long. There was a newfound lightness in my step, a clarity in my thoughts. The scar remained, a testament to what I had endured, but it no longer throbbed. It was just a mark, a part of my story, a reminder of resilience. My life, already rebuilt, now felt truly free, unburdened by the echoes of a broken bond. I was finally, truly, moving forward. And so, here I am, years later, sharing a story I never thought I'd tell. What did I learn from all of it? Maybe the most profound lesson is that healing isn't about forgetting, but about letting go. It's about accepting that some scars will always be a part of you, but they don't have to define your present or dictate your future. For a long time, I carried the weight of that betrayal, the anger, the endless whys. I let it shadow parts of my life, even as I worked so hard to rebuild. But facing Michael that day, seeing him so utterly diminished, paradoxically set me free. It wasn't about vengeance or seeing him suffer. It was about recognizing that his state, his choices, were no longer my burden to carry. So, if you're out there, listening to this, and you're carrying the weight of a broken bond, a betrayal, or a loss that still cuts deep, know this: your peace is paramount. Don't let someone else's actions, past or present, hold your heart hostage. You get to decide when a chapter ends, when the book is closed, and when you finally, truly, walk away. It takes courage, immense courage, to face the pain and then to choose release. But trust me, the lightness that comes from letting go? It's worth every single step of that difficult journey. Your life, your healing, and your future are yours alone to reclaim.